Member for Newton North Delta.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's my pleasure today to rise and speak in support of Bill S-5, an act to amend the Canada National Parks Act, Nááts'ihch'oh. And Mr. Speaker, first of all, I have to say that I do apologize if I have mispronounced, and I'm sure I have, the name. I obviously have to practice more, but I always try to get the pronunciation right, but we're not always successful with that. But so, my apologies. Anyway, it's a national park, part of the National Park Reserves of Canada. Mr. Speaker, it is a pleasure, and I want to say that I've heard a lot of talk about Christmas today in this House, and maybe it's because everybody is anxious to get back into their ridings and meet up with their constituents and do a lot of the celebratory events around Christmas time. But really, when I looked at this bill and this new park, we have to first of all acknowledge the Satu, Dene and Métis people, the area's Aboriginal people, for this wonderful gift to Canadians. And I want to thank them on behalf of all Canadians for this gift of this park. And I also want to thank my colleagues, the Conservatives, for bringing forward this motion and accepting the gift that was offered to them and putting it through legislation. So thank you for that. And I think we have to say that in the hearings that were held, and these were lengthy hearings, overall there was huge support for this park. And there were a number of options that were looked at. Option number one would have given a total area of 6,450 square kilometers. And this would have provided the best conservation values while providing an open area around the existing mineral interests. Option two, with a total area of 5,770 square kilometers, diminished the achievement of conservation goals and allowed more mineral potential to be available. And option three, the smallest proposal, with a total area of 4,840 square kilometers, took advantage of the mineral potential within the proposed park reserve while providing some protection to key values. And so hearings were held on all these three options. And what we have here before us today is not the preferred option of all those who attended the hearings, because 92.3% of those who participated in the hearings indicated a preference for, of those who indicated a preference had preferred option one. But as you know, we've got here before us today option three. Now, Mr. Speaker, this park is a lot smaller than the preferred option spoken to by those who expressed an interest, but at the same time, baby steps are better than nothing, and this is a step in the right direction. Mr. Speaker, I'm not saying anything new or controversial when I say we live in one of the most beautiful countries on this planet. And I've had the pleasure to travel from coast to coast to coast in my previous life, and had the privilege of visiting some of our remotest regions. I've seen the majestic beauty and the diversity of our geography. And I, like other Canadians, are very concerned that some of our pristine north, some of our biologically diverse areas, that we offer some environmental protection. And here, with the creation of a park, what we are guaranteeing for Canadians is some levels of conservation and an area for them to visit. And, you know, it would not be in the Christmas spirit if I didn't say that this is a positive step on the part of my colleagues across the way. It is. My next plea with my colleagues across the way is now that you have actually put forward legislation, and we'll be supporting it, though you could have got it through the House without our support, I'm always aware of that, that the key thing for you to do now, I would say, is to provide resources. Often in this House, we have a knack for passing legislation which sounds very, very grand. And it gives a sense of hope to those who are out there. But unless we resource the legislation we pass, what happens then is our legislation just remain words on paper. And we've heard over the last number of years how our parks are in dire straits, many of our national parks, and the need for funding to maintain them. And when in December of 2013, I know that seems like a long time ago, the Toronto Star reported that there is an almost $3 billion backlog in deferred maintenance at Parks Canada. I just want us to listen to that number, Mr. Speaker, $3 billion of a backlog of maintenance. So you throw into that a new park, which we are supporting, and then we're worried that this creation of a new park could just be an empty gesture unless we are willing to maintain our parks and do what it takes to keep them going. Parks Canada, and this isn't any numbers that we've made up, has identified aging infrastructure, inadequate levels of funding and maintenance as a key risk for the department in its November 2013 departmental performance report. And the Commissioner for the Environment identified a wide and persistent gap between what the government commits to and what it is achieving. So, you know, creating a park is wonderful. You know, take credit for that. But at the same time, let's make sure that you also put into the budget resources that will actually support these, not only this park, but other parks that are a little bit, you know, getting run down. I would say more than a little bit at the kind of report that's being given to us by Parks Canada. And also, Mr. Speaker, you know, when we took a look at the 2013-2014 budget announcements of spending on infrastructure in parks and and then the picture becomes even more bleak. The budget announced $391 million over 5 years to deal with crumbling buildings, roads and dams. This amount won't even cover the backlog. But more importantly, the amount the government is actually going to spend in the short term is ridiculous. This year in 2014, guess how much they're going to be spending on all our parks, on all the backlog? $1 million. $1 million. A huge sum of money, I know, for those of us, those who work for a living, but when we look at the budget and the kind of evidence that is before this government, and the evidence is we're $3 billion behind just to do the repair work, and what they budget is $1 million. And then in 2015, next year, of course, they will spend $4 million. But here is another thing. We're not surprised at the broken promises from across the way. And those broken promises have been on a huge number of issues, and I'll get to those later. But then they say after the next election, they will spend $386 million. And my question is, why is that after the next election, when the need since 2013, as identified in November of 2013, is that the need is well into the billions of dollars. So, Mr. Speaker, because of that, it's very, very difficult for us to take this government at its word. Of course, the NDP supports the creation of national parks in Canada's north, as well as across Canada, coast to coast to coast. In my riding of Surrey Newton North Delta, I'm very, very proud to have parks, like local parks, and And in our region, we've got some amazing parks as well. And I think citizens, coast to coast to coast, really, really appreciate our parks. And I don't know about you, Mr. Speaker, but in my younger days, I spent much time camping in our national parks, you know, from the time that my kids were little until quite recently. It was an absolute pleasure to go into those parks and enjoy our beautiful scenery and everything that our parks have to offer, from kayaking, swimming, etc., etc. And I say until recently, Mr. Speaker, because I have to be honest that since my election, I haven't really had the time to go camping with my children or grandchildren, but it's certainly something I do look forward to next summer. So, you know, here we have a park that has, you know, the Conservatives have brought forward after 7 years of consultations and negotiations with the Aboriginal peoples of that region. But the Conservative, this government, can create all the parks they want. After all, they have this majority. But without funding and careful protection of the ecological integrity of this and all national parks, the designation is relatively meaningless in terms of conservation. Mr. Speaker, when I visit our Pacific Rim National Park in BC on the west coast of Vancouver Island, I have seen firsthand some of the upgrading that is needed, but I've also had the absolute pleasure of enjoying that beautiful park ever since I moved to BC. And once again, I want to keep hitting back on the fact that we need resources in order to support our parks. It's like owning a house, Mr. Speaker, and I'm sure many of my colleagues across the way own their own homes. And when you own a house, if you don't do the repairs, it starts to crumble around you. First it gets run down, and then before you know it, it's in a crumbling stage. Well, it's the same when we create parks. If we don't maintain them and we don't invest into those parks for maintenance and for the infrastructure, what happens is that our parks become compromised and they also start crumbling. And I think that, I'm sure my friends across the aisle don't want that to happen either. So I know that they are going to come forward with a budget that they're bringing forward in January that will have significant dollars attached, so we can go forward and make sure that our parks are protected. And Mr. Speaker, you know, I just can't imagine anybody in Canada being opposed to the creation of national parks, except for maybe some mining interests and others that really want to go in and extract goods. And, you know, Mr. Speaker, we have to find a way of supporting our extractive industries, but at the same time making sure that we look after our environment. And we want to make sure that for our grandchildren and our great-grandchildren, they have parts of our country that is pristine, that is protected, is a national heritage that they can visit. Coming from England, Mr. Speaker, I was so overwhelmed by the geography of Canada when I first came here. And I had all kinds of stereotypes in my head when I came from England that were soon destroyed. And they should have been destroyed because a lot of my stereotypes were based on what I saw on television. But at the same time, when I came here and saw the diversity of our geography, I first moved into Quebec. Beautiful, beautiful province, and I can say that we enjoyed our 2 years in Quebec, and we enjoyed the geography and the wilderness as well, and spent a lot of time outdoors every time we could get away and explore different parts of Quebec and the surrounding areas. But whether we are in Newfoundland, or whether we are in the Yukon, or whether we are in BC or in Saskatchewan. Canadians are very, very concerned about their environment, about Canada. And Mr. Speaker, let me digress just for a nanosecond to say, I'm also hearing from Canadians that they're very, very embarrassed at the actions of our government recently when it comes to protection of our environment and the role they have played internationally. And quite honestly, Mr. Speaker, I was so taken aback when I heard the Prime Minister say that it would be crazy to regulate the oil and gas industry. And because I am sure I remember many a times hearing from ministers and the Prime Minister how those regulations were coming, and then suddenly it's all an act of craziness. So we are very, very concerned. And as a result, we also want to say that this is a little step in the right direction on the part of government. After all, creating a park is a good Christmassy thing to do. Yeah, and it is a good Christmassy thing to do. And, but at the same time, Mr. Speaker, I have to plea with my colleagues across the way that they look at some of the deregulations that they have done, some of the environmental protections they have taken away, and they reinstate many of those to protect our waterways, our pristine coastlines, our lakes. Because I would say, Mr. Speaker, in my beautiful province of British Columbia, we are very, very dependent on the tourism industry. And we are very, very dependent on the tourism industry. So we just cannot imagine the kind of damage that would happen if there was an oil spill along the BC coastline. Because we've seen how many years it takes to do the cleanup and how many billions and billions of dollars it takes up. We're also concerned about the pristine nature of our lakes and rivers because we don't want them to become the victims of oil spills as well. So we want to make sure that the government across the way, in the sort of spirit of Christmas, as they're looking at other good things they want to do, that they should really take a look at and revisit the environmental degradation that has occurred. I should say protection, environmental protection degradation that has occurred under this government. And my plea with them is, if not for yourselves, do it for your children, your grandchildren, and your great-grandchildren. And if you don't have children or grandchildren of your own, do it for the sake of all the children who are going to be following us and living on this planet long after many of us have gone. And, Mr. Speaker, it's, when we're talking about our environment, it is not a joke. I want to tell you that whether I visit an elementary school or a high school, and I'm so delighted that I actually get the privilege to visit schools in my riding, where the students decide the agenda. They decide what they want to ask me questions about. I don't walk in and say, okay, today we're going to talk about this. I'm invited in, they ask me questions. And Mr. Speaker, the top 2 questions every classroom I go to are related to the environment, are related to climate change. Because, Mr. Speaker, our young people get it. Our young people get it. So whether I am visiting Princess Margaret's School in my riding, or whether I am visiting Tamanawas, or whether I am visiting NDSS, the students are fully engaged. And, Mr. Speaker, this is, I know you've just given me the signal. Here we are the day before the House sits down for Christmas. Let me take this opportunity to wish my colleagues across the aisle and my colleagues on this side, Canadians coast to coast to coast, Merry Christmas to all of you who celebrate Christmas, and to people who don't celebrate Christmas, happy holidays. Enjoy this time with your family. This is the time when all of us get together and sit around the fire and tell old stories. And I'm really, really looking forward to spending the Christmas break with my beautiful grandchildren and the rest of my family. And so, Mr. Speaker, Merry Christmas to you as well, and Happy Holidays.